Hey guys, it's Allie. Welcome back to Infertile, the podcast. This is episode 242 called Tess. This episode is sponsored by Berry Fertility. Guys, as we all know, starting your fertility journey can be a big and deeply personal moment, but that doesn't mean you have to go it alone. Introducing the Berry Fertility app, a free way to manage your fertility treatments, including egg freezing, IVF, and embryo transfers, all in one place. The Berry app does a ton of things. It can help you understand the stages of your treatment, look up information about your medications, and set reminders for your doses and appointments. You'll also find simple-to-follow injection videos, tutorials, and articles with pro tips on how to manage your injections. Oh my God, this is something I so wish I had when I was going through it. The Berry team is always available to provide support and answer your questions. It's 100% free to use, and you can find it in the Apple App Store. Try Berry Fertility, the trusted partner for every fertility journey. Thanks, Berry. This episode is sponsored by Mira. How does Mira help track ovulation? Mira measures actual fertility hormone concentrations with 99% accuracy. Mira is unlike other fertility trackers. It uses technology that's similar to what's used in the fertility lab, so it's just like having your own mini lab at home. With the power of AI, Mira learns about your cycle and gives you personalized and accurate insights about your ovulation and fertility window. And yes, it works for those with irregular cycles and PCOS. Mira syncs your data automatically, eliminating both manual charting and guesswork. Designed to be expandable, the Mira system will also offer more at-home health tracking in the future. In addition to LH, E3G, and PDG, Mira now has the capacity to measure your FSH and soon your HCG, plus other hormones. Guys, that's a mouthful. Order the Mira Starter Kit or Mira Plus Starter Kit online at miracare.com with promo code InfertileAF to get an exclusive discount. Again, go to miracare.com, that's MIRACARE.com, use code InfertileAF, and you'll get an exclusive InfertileAF listener discount. Thanks, Mira. This episode is supported by Receptiva DX. Getting pregnant isn't always easy, as so many of you listening know. Many couples struggle with infertility, and unexplained infertility can be particularly frustrating. Receptiva DX is the only test that can identify endometriosis, progesterone resistance, and endometritis in a single sample, all causes for unexplained infertility and the success rates of IVF treatments. Receptiva DX includes BCL6, a marker that identifies uterine inflammation, most often associated with asymptomatic, aka silent, endometriosis. BCL6 is found in more than 50% of women with unexplained infertility and over 65% of women with 2 or more IVF failures. If positive for the Receptiva DX test, treatment options can improve the chances for a successful live birth 5-fold. Learn more at receptivadx.com or download their app, which is also called Receptiva DX. And for $75 off, you can go to their website, order the test, and use code InfertileAF23. Again, it's receptivadx.com. Use code InfertileAF23. Thanks, Receptiva DX. Okay, guys, so today I am talking to Tess Annique Souray, who is a model and a fitness influencer, and she's going to tell us all about her family building journey, which started when at 25, she found out that IVF was her only shot to have a baby, according to her doctor. So she's going to talk about that. She's going to talk about her sobriety and her recovery, which is a big part of her life and her husband's life as well, and how that came into play with her family building journey. And she's going to tell us all the things. So it's a great, honest conversation. She's very funny. Spoiler alert, she is pregnant now, over 22 weeks pregnant. So we're going to find out how she got there. But I want to thank Tess. And without further ado, this is Tess's infertility story. Hi, Tess. How are you today?
Hi, I'm so good. Thanks for having me, Allie.
thank you so much for doing this. I've been very excited to talk to you. I feel like it's been on the calendar for a while.
It has been. I
I
know. I'm so
know.
excited.
So tell me, let's start at the very beginning. Did you always want to be a mom?
Yes and no. I feel
Okay.
like when I was younger, the idea seemed like so far-fetched, right? Like I always kind of knew I wanted to have a family, but how was that going to look? That part I didn't know. And then when I met my now husband, he actually has two daughters from his first marriage. So that was kind of my step into like, oh, this is what it's really like. And then 100%, then it was like, yes, this is something I really, really want. So by having that type of blended family, I was really, open and kind of brought into what it's like to be a parent and co-parent very quickly. And so that was something to me that I think just made me want to be a mom even more.
Yeah. How did you and your husband meet?
So we share this story quite often. We're both very open about it, but we're actually both sober. So we met in treatment, I think like 7 years ago, which is what they say, like never, date someone in your first year of sobriety and all this
Right.
stuff. But it's something that was just going to happen. We met in that, and then 6 months later we reconnected through a crazy series of events. So it was just one of those things that when God's doing it, nothing can stop it.
I love that. And I appreciate how open you've been about addiction and recovery and everything that you've been through. Thank you for all of that. I think like with sharing your infertility stuff, it's just so powerful to share your stories and so relatable too, because there's so many people out there that are going through it and don't have anybody to relate to or talk to. So
100%.
yeah. Have you always been kind of an open book about stuff like that?
Yes and no. I feel like with social media, like kind of like the rise of it, people have started to share their stories more like authentically. And it's also it's the thing that people relate to the most. So it's like they want to hear that. They don't want to just see like the highlight reel of everything. And I think it's like, it's what makes us human. And so it was very easy for me to kind of just like, because it's my life, right? This is like what we do. Like we're sober, we don't drink. Like this is just, it's just sharing my life. And that's a big portion of that, because if I don't have that, I don't have anything else. So for me, it totally goes hand in hand. I think the infertility community is so strong. Like another community that's just as strong like that is like the recovery community of people that are like, will always have your back no matter what. So I think it's been a really beautiful thing to have two really, really solid groups of support behind you.
I want to talk about growing up for you. What did you know about fertility and like having babies? We talk about this a lot.
Absolutely nothing.
I know we talk about this so much on the show, and I'm like, I didn't know shit. I didn't know anything. It was always like, don't get pregnant, right? Don't get pregnant.
And I had this like crazy theory. This is just like a stupid little theory, but I was in the first kind of like wave, what felt like, of women, like or girls, when you're like 15 years old and, your skin might not be great. They're like, oh, just put her on birth control. Or, like that kind of wave, like the guinea pig wave of, we're like, why are we doing this? Are we sure? And so I remember doing that at 15 because like I hated my skin. And I was like, what? And they're like, oh, it's just the hormones. We'll just put you on the birth control. It'll stabilize everything. Like, looking back on it, I'm like, that's so interesting. But I also thought it was crazy because I knew nothing about like my body, how it works, like who I was, like any of that. I didn't know that until I started this whole fertility journey, which was like, a decade later. Crazy.
Right. So I read that you guys started, was it 2020 that you kind of started going down like the family building journey, or like when you first went to a fertility clinic? Tell me what was happening with you guys.
Yeah, we started when I was 25. Which is pre-COVID, because I know COVID just kind of throws a wrench in the whole thing. But basically, for like, we had been trying for a year and nothing was happening. And I'm like, I think I want to get my levels checked or something, because my husband obviously had children. So we're like, this works. And we're like, why? I feel like something should have happened by now, because I'm 25. I wasn't on birth control. I'm like, something feels like off. So I literally Google like fertility center near me. And just go to the closest place. And I'm like, let's do some, like, I thought it was just going to be a simple test, right? I didn't know it was like a whole 3 month like of your life, all of these labs and, you and your partner and like everything, everything under the sun. And so we started that process, and then COVID rolls around. And so it was a kind of like a weird part of time where you couldn't really do anything, but you kind of got the information from those tests. You're just kind of like sitting in a standstill. So that was really interesting. So what was with all that?
What was happening that brought you to the clinic? You were just, trying to get pregnant. Nothing was happening, or had you had any losses? Okay.
No, I'd never been pregnant in my life before.
Okay.
And so I had been off of birth control at that time for like a year and a half. And so I'm like, I feel like it's easy, like supposed to be easier than this. You know what I mean? I was like at 25,
Totally.
my husband has kids. I'm like, this should be like 1 + 1 = 2. And it just wasn't that
Exactly.
way.
Right.
And so I'm like, I feel like I'm missing something, or like, I don't know of something. I'm like, what if I can't even have kids? Like, you don't know these things until you're put into that position.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
it was so interesting when we were doing the testing, because they said like my AMH was someone who was like 37 and I was 25. And so I'm just so
Did you know
grateful
what
that
AMH was?
no, I had absolutely no idea what
I
it was.
didn't. Yeah,
I had no
same.
clue. I didn't even know these like numbers correlated, and there could actually be a difference between like your biological age and your birth age. Like that didn't make sense to me, how it could be like, how could I biologically be different than how old I am? And so that was just a whole new learning curve. I always say like the fertility world is like learning a new language, because unless you've been through it, you don't know it. Like unless you learn Russian, you don't know Russian.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? That's what it is. Like unless you do it, you just don't know, because there's like a whole new vocabulary. There's a whole new series of events and testing. And even for my husband, who had 2 kids with like, he was, I think, 25 and 30-ish when he had them. Now it's like, there's a whole different experience, because he didn't know that world either.
Right.
And it's crazy.
It's so wild. You're so exactly right with all the acronyms and all the tests. I mean, I do this all day, every day, and I still have trouble remembering like what's an ERA exactly and what is a hysteroscopy like involved, like all that stuff. It's like, it's hard to keep it all straight. Tell me so you got the AMH diagnosis, and then what did they tell you to do? Or like, what did you guys think? Or was it, since it was COVID, did you have to like pause?
Well, they said basically from our doctor said our only shot really was IVF. Like both of our levels weren't optimal. My husband had played professional sports for like 17 years. So he's had like 20 surgeries. Like he's like Iron Man. Everything is broken, but he's still, like solid steel. And
He's
so
been reconstructed.
He's been reconstructed.
I love that.
And so his body's not the same when he had kids, when he was 25 before his injuries. And so we were just at a very different place. And they said like IVF is really your only option, or it's going to be like one of those, 0.001% chance miracles that something happens on its own.
Okay.
And so
what did you think when they told you that?
I was a little surprised, because I was 25 and I was so young, and I was like, really? I thought you did that. Like, right. My whole perception of it was that this is, I guess, you did that when you're like 40 and, you're trying, it's like your last resort kind of
Totally.
thing. But because people had been sharing their stories so openly, I knew a lot of women that were doing IVF, and a lot of young women too, like 30 in their 20s, or for whatever reason it may be. And so I think just having a lot of those conversations with my friends, that I had known a lot of people were having those types of experiences as well. So I wasn't alone in that. So it wasn't something I was ever fearful of. I was just like, oh, this is interesting. Because I never would have, when you look back, you're like, oh, I definitely didn't think that was going to happen.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. It's not something I could have predicted.
Never. I mean, I think that who thinks that unless you have some sort of existing condition or something, and you've been told, like who thinks that they're going to have to go through any sort of, reproductive or assisted reproductive technology or IVF or any of that stuff. I mean,
totally.
I never in a million years would have thought that I would have had to do that.
Until you're in it and you're like, all right.
Until you're in it.
The only thing you can do is like jump in the deep end of the pool with no floaties on, right? You're just like, this is what we're doing. So let's do it.
Totally. So what was going on with you guys, like as a couple? Like it's hard when you're trying to have a baby and it's not working. Like I've been really open about my marriage and how my husband and I were just like in a really dark place at so many different junctures. How were you guys doing?
Well, I think it's so interesting because we have like the foundation of recovery and sobriety. Mental health and like having honest conversations and having difficult conversations has always been from the get-go something we've done day one. There's never been like a sweeping under the rug situation.
Interesting. Okay.
So I think that has really benefited us in being able to have like difficult and hard conversations in a respectful manner. We always joke we have like one good fight a year. You know what I mean? Like one really good fight where it's like you get it all out. And then it's like, we know how to manage the rest of the time.
I love that.
Yeah. So it's not perfect, but we definitely learned a lot. And my husband is so patient and so understanding that it was really helpful. It was great to have him to navigate it with, because I felt like he was my support system through that. But then there was also a time like throughout our journey when things got a lot more difficult and a lot harder, where it's also like you can only pick yourself up. It's like you have to do the work yourself to get through it. Like no one can do it for you. So we've experienced all portions of that. But I definitely think having that foundation of recovery or sobriety has really helped us because we know how to communicate.
Yeah,
when we need
that's so good. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what happened next? When did you actually start treatment and retrievals and all that stuff?
So I think we literally got our results, I kid you not, like a week before the world shut down. Phase 1 of COVID. This is like Tiger King era of COVID, right? When like no one was leaving their house.
Oh my God, the Tiger King.
Season 1.
I have not, oh my God. I have not thought about that in
right? It's like an unlocked memory.
That was
everyone
such
was
a
watching it.
core memory for everybody going through COVID.
It's honestly got to be like one of the most streamed shows of all time because everyone was just at home and like it came out and we're like, I guess we're doing this now.
Yeah, totally.
So basically all you could do is, we were told like, you should start taking these supplements. You should start kind of doing this. We don't know with the world what's happening. And we were in a state where like everything was shut down. Like you couldn't do these type of elective procedures. So that's all we really could do. And so I think we just gave ourselves like the year because there was obviously, I don't want to say like bigger things happening than IVF, but like the whole world was shut down. No one knew what was happening. My husband's from Canada. You can't cross the border, right? Like all this whole plethora of stuff. And so we had his kids and then they were living with us sometime because everyone's school was online. And so it was just such an interesting time because you couldn't really do anything and you just had to be okay with surrendering of like not being able to do something, which for me as like a German type A Virgo, like that act of surrender is just like a constant thing because all I want to do is do everything all at once, you know? And so it was definitely something I just had to like, okay, like we literally can't do anything in the situation except, take the supplements, do the protocol and just wait this out for however long it's going to be. So for us, it ended up being about, I think, a year. I think I did the world shut down in March and then I did my first retrieval in January the following year. So I've done 3 retrievals and each one, now I feel like I do them for fun, right? I'm like, I'm just going to do another one.
It's just like a hobby.
It's just a little 2-week adventure.
Right. How did the first one go? Can we break it down like time by time?
First one was rough. I had no idea what to expect. I had planned a vacation because it was like for Valentine's Day. It was like end of January, early February. So we planned a vacation to Cabo 2 days after my retrieval. Like this is how little I knew.
Okay.
We did not go to Cabo, obviously, because after retrievals, you do not want to do anything. You want to sit in your bed with your heating pad and you can't even go in the water. So like, what's the point of, going on a beach vacation?
Right. Exactly.
So I was just so naive to like that portion of it. And I think at least for me, retrievals were a game of like hit and missing and trying to find the sweet spot. So like the first time I experienced like the OHSS, like the hyper, that was in itself physically awful.
Oh yeah. So that can be really painful.
So painful. If it wasn't for COVID, I would have like gone to the ER, but I actually thought that was like the worst of 2 evils than staying at home because of like everything that was happening. But I remember waking up crying at 3:00 in the morning, being like, I think I'm going to like either explode or die or like die by explosion because it was, you know what I mean? I was like this, like my stomach was so hard. I felt like a Ninja Turtle. Like it was so painful. And then I just knew, I was like, this seems off. And then I kind of talked to my other friends who were like similar to my size and stature. Not that, you should compare everything, but I realized like my meds were so much higher dosage than a lot of my other friends who were like similar in height and stuff. And I'm like, maybe I had I was like overstimulated in that regard. And it turns out I was for my height and size. And so we had gotten 2 embryos. We did the PGT testing. So we got 3, we got two back. And we knew that we would probably do another one just because they say, for like every 1 kid you have, you want at least, 3 just in case. Right. So then it kind of became like being a squirrel and like harvesting acorns for winter. You just want to get.
I love all your analogies.
They're crazy today. Like they're just all over the place. But that's what it felt like. You're like, okay, I have these 2. Now we need a few more. Because what I didn't understand is like, oh, you really don't know what's going to happen. And the waves, I think. For me, I was like, oh, I'm 25, or maybe this time like 26, 27. Doing IVF is like going to be the hard part. Like the transfer and the pregnancy will be the easy part, right? I was like, just getting the embryos is the most difficult part. At least that's actually what my doctor told me. So I thought like this was kind of like going to have the hardest behind us. And then there was also a lot of fun, like life things that we had happening. Like we actually had done our first retrieval before we got engaged. And then we ended up getting married, of course. So everything was kind of spaced out. So it wasn't so like rushed for time because we've done this process over 4 or 5 years. Okay. So also a lot of life happened in between. Like we had built our house, we moved into our house, giant pandemic, and then we got engaged and married. And these were all things we knew were happening, but I wasn't like, okay, it's like, we need to know. Right. Time is ticking. We need this to happen. So I think having like fun life events in between helped keep our mind off of. That's so funny. I was just going to say, like, so many people, including myself, like sometimes get the blinders on, right? Like you want this so badly. And then your life starts to kind of revolve around it. And you can't go to this event or you can't go to that baby shower because you don't want to, or you have to not go to that wedding or, whatever. But it sounds like you guys had a good balance of like still living your lives, but also doing this too. Totally. And I think that helped a lot by having like the breathers in between, because I think it's so hard when you do it back to back to back. Mm-hmm. And it's nice to like, for every summer, we spend our summers up in Idaho. So it's like, we knew we wouldn't be doing IVF there because we live on a lake and it's, there's no IVF clinic probably 300 miles from the town that we live in. And so it's a literal break, and it's nice to have that mental break and physical break on your body too, because it is a lot. And so we just would kind of take summers to like have fun and regroup. And then in the fall, kind of, talk about things again. So we ended up doing one more retrieval after our wedding in May. And I felt much more confident. Like the first time, my husband had to do all my shots for me, right? I was like setting alarms every night at 7 p.m. because I thought that if you did about 7:01, they wouldn't work, right? Like just like crazy. And then the second one was a little bit more relaxed. And I was like, okay, I can try to do some of these. And I felt like much more confident because you knew like the only schedule you need to have is like, don't have a schedule, like clear your schedule out. You make no plans and just like, I work from home, thankfully, so I can just like figure out that, but like no trips, no vacations, no like overexerting yourself and saying yes to 100 million things. So in that retrospect, I was a lot more prepared because I knew what to expect. And then of course, summer happened. We didn't talk about it. We didn't think about it, which is always just such a nice little like regroup. And then when we came back in the fall was when we decided to do our first transfer. Okay. And so that to me was so interesting because we did our first transfer and it worked and we were pregnant. And you for at least my clinic, you do the 3 different ultrasounds, one at 6 weeks, one at 7, and one at 10. Go to 6 weeks, everything was perfect. Go to 7 weeks, it's like the cutest little heartbeat, everything was great. Go to 10 weeks and my doctor comes in, he's like, it's not good news. And then like the world went black and it was like a movie, right? You don't see anything and that whole situation. And there was like no longer a heartbeat. And all I remember him saying was like, there's no, like sometimes it just happens. It's just bad luck. I was 29 at this time. We knew the embryo was healthy. So I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I'm like, something's off. It's not just bad luck. I didn't just get like the short end of a stick. Yeah. I'm so sorry. I mean, you must have been devastated, right? That was the hardest time for me. That was also right before the holidays. We found out like November 20th. So it was like right before Thanksgiving. So canceled all Thanksgiving plans, all Christmas, because I didn't want to do anything. Like I just, like had no desire to celebrate any type of things with family. That makes a lot of sense. Because we were 10 weeks, we had told both of our parents and we had told his daughters. So then it's like my poor husband, because I turned my phone off. My phone was literally on do not disturb for like 3 months. I just didn't want to deal with it. My husband had to like call everyone and tell them what had happened. And so we thought we were kind of safe at 10 weeks. And then we went to this appointment a few days later and we were not safe at all. And so then it was a very dark and depressing time. And that time for us was the most difficult because sometimes like that saying, or it's like relationships aren't always like 50-50. Sometimes they're like 90-10, or this was like 99% my husband and like my 1% of like breathing and showing up. You know what I mean? Yes, like, totally. I did not leave bed. I was so depressed. This is something we had both wanted. And I felt like now this was like all on my body because the embryo, everything came back healthy. It wasn't, right. I hate the term like products of conception and all that stuff, but they tested everything and everything from like the embryo side was fine. So I'm like, then what happened? Like, what doesn't make sense? And then I gave myself about 2.5 months of like a proper pity party, like through the year. And
That's
then
fair. I'm glad you did
fair.
that. You know, you got to give yourself that.
Like I cried so much. And then I remember my husband said to me sometime in January, he's like, I understand this affects you so much, but how it's affecting you right now is also affecting like our relationship and our life and me at this point. Like he was not only dealing with like his own grief of it, but like how I was deteriorating from this grief. And so then like there's a saying in any 12-step program or in AA specifically, when like life gets really hard, you can either do two things. You can like lean in or you can lean out. Leaning out meaning like see you later. Lean in meaning like put your boots on and double down. So that's kind of what I did. My sponsor suggested to me I do like 90 meetings in 90 days.
Wow.
And now they're like a lot of them are on Zoom, so it was very easy to do. So I hadn't done that since the beginning of my sobriety, like 6 years ago, right? And so like you're bawling, crying in these meetings, and I'm in women's rooms, so it's like a bunch of women. But I met a lot of women who have had their own infertility struggles who are also sober. So that was kind of like the sweet spot for me of like two worlds colliding, because it was people who really understood like who I was, because these were like two massive parts of my life kind of combining into one.
Yeah.
So that was really helpful for me. And by the end of like the 90 days, I started to feel like myself again, because I had spent that time like processing everything and kind of coming up with like a game plan of like, okay, now what? Like, what's next? So that to me was like a super pivotal part of like how I mentally got through that.
Yeah.
It's like 90 hours of therapy, you know? That's
totally
really what it was.
That's so important. And I love the notion, and again, analogy of like leaning in and putting your boots on. Like, that's so great that you did that. You know, you got to sometimes actively try to heal, right? Like
You definitely,
although
that's
I'm
like
also a fan of laying in bed and crying for 3 weeks. If you need that too, it's like all of it.
No, I had like, cause the holidays was so difficult for me. We didn't want to see our family. Like I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to host. I didn't want to do the whole Christmas tree thing. It was just like, we ended up actually going to Mexico for that time because I just didn't want to celebrate Christmas, you know, because it just felt so off-putting to me. But it was really nice to be able to have the 2 months of a pity party, because I needed it. I just needed to like feel all the feels, and then I needed to put my boots on and be like, okay, we're going to figure this out. And so then started my like second opinion marathon, because I called and researched every single person I could get my hands on that I thought was an expert in this field. I talked to doctors from New York to Dallas to San Diego to San Francisco to LA, like everywhere.
Wow.
And I got so many second opinions, and I'm like, this is what went down. What are your thoughts? And I just talked to people. And I learned.
And what were you
so much
learning?
from that.
Yeah. What were some of the takeaways from that?
One of these doctors told me that it's a great sign that we saw the heartbeat and that the embryo did its job. And then she goes, what's interesting is that in between 7 and 10 weeks, if something like this happens, like we typically like to do some type of like blood clotting or blood panel workup like that. Have you ever done that before? I'm like, well, unless it was in like the intro testing done, 3 years ago, I wouldn't have done it additionally. And she goes, I would consider looking into that, because that might be where some of the answers are, and you don't know unless you test. And at this point, it's like, what's another test, right? You've done so many tests that I'm like,
100%. Yeah.
Take my labs, take my blood, whatever you need. I don't mind.
Totally.
And so I started looking into it, and I was like, oh, this is super interesting. And she was talking about like the Pregmune test. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's basically like the pregnancy and immunity combined into the word Pregmune. And it's how your body basically reacts to pregnancy and all the goods that go with it. And I thought it was crazy, because it was like 3 different labs over the course of 3 different days, like fasted and non-fasted from different lab companies. And I think I got like 85 vials that did 200 tests. And then my husband got them as well. And it was great that they come to your house. You're like laying down so you don't pass out, right? It's a lot of blood. And then 6 to 8 weeks later, you get a full report workup back. And in that report workup, it tells you everything, which I love, in plain English. Like the worst thing is getting a lab report back, and it's like, I don't understand this.
You're like, I can't decipher this. It's like hieroglyphics. Yeah.
You're like, I don't know what this means. This was like, each page was, this is what you were tested for. This is why it's important. These were your results. And this is what we suggest based on the findings. which I could appreciate. Like, I love things in plain English. And I found out that I have 3 active blood clotting disorders, but they're only active in pregnancy. So they don't affect me any other time but when I'm pregnant, which was so interesting. Because to me, this was like, I was missing a puzzle piece, or like, I was missing something that was like the key aha moment. And this was it. So I was so excited that we finally had figured it out, because I think the hardest part of IVF is when you're trying to figure out the answer, but you don't know the question. You know what I mean? You're like,
so well said.
We're trying to solve this problem, but we don't really know what the problem, where it comes from, like what it is.
Right.
And now I'm like, okay, we know what the problem is, and now we know the solution. So that to me is when like it was a game changer.
Yeah.
Because that to me, it was like, this is what we were waiting for. This one little piece of information that is like the most important piece.
Right. Even though that to me was like, even though it sucks to get a diagnosis, sometimes it's like, well, at least we know how to deal with that diagnosis, rather than 100%. It's just unexplained or there's no answers. Yeah.
Yes. One of the doctors actually told me, she's like, it's not unexplained, it's unexplored. And that to me, like, will always be in my head.
Yes. Did you just recently post that, or did I see? I feel like I just saw that. Okay.
Yes. Because I always think about it, it's like, that means you just need to keep looking, because there's an answer for everything. It's not just like, oh, you got the short end of the stick. Like, no, there's a reason. And so what was interesting is that my doctor here, the one that I did my retrievals, my transfer with, he actually didn't want me. I asked to do the like RPL testing, and he said, no, I'll only do it after 3 losses. So I'm like, I'll have to do this. Like, I have to go through this trauma 3 times for you to take me seriously. When it's just lab work, and it's not something like, super invasive. I do lab work every 2 days for you. How is that possible? And so I did this test, and when I went before my second transfer, I gave him the report, and I go, I'm only going to stay at this clinic if we implement these results and this protocol into my next transfer. If you're not comfortable with it, I understand, but I'm going to go somewhere else, because I'm not going to go through this 3 times for you to take me seriously.
Yeah. And what was the protocol? Like, what were they telling you to do differently?
So every single day, baby aspirin in the morning, and then Lovenox at night, which is the blood thinning injection. And then I'll take that 6 weeks postpartum, of course, stopping in labor for like that sweet spot. But a lot of doctors don't want to do it, or, for whatever reason, because it's like a blood thinner, and they're like, oh no, but if you have a blood clotting disorder, that's what you need. Is not only 1, I have 3. And so on my, little beautiful sheet that Pregnune gave me of like, this is what we suggest before your next transfer. And it's like, please take baby aspirin. And they see every single medication you've been on for like your previous retrievals, your previous transfers. I'd also just like to say I'm not affiliated with them. I'm just like such a huge fan because they gave me my answers.
Yeah,
so it's like not like I'm getting paid to say any of these things. Like it truly gave me the information that I needed to know.
So what did the doctor say?
He goes, if that's something that you want to do and you're comfortable with, and you don't mind taking the 1 injection a day. I'm like, if this is the answer, I'm pretty sure that if you told someone your best shot at having a baby is to have a shot every day, to take it.
Oh my God, I would do like a shot every minute.
No problem. I'll do one every hour. I don't care.
Totally,
this is what you're telling me is like the best case situation. I will do it gladly with a smile on my face. You know what I mean? I always say like I did the 3 retrievals because now I'm a pro at doing all my shots. Like my husband hasn't touched a needle for me in like 2 years because I can do them no problem. Right. And so that to me was like, it's no problem. I'll do the shot, but this is what we're going to do. And so we did the 6-week ultrasound. Everything was perfect. 7-week ultrasound. Everything was perfect. 10-week ultrasound. Everything was perfect. And so it was just like such a relief because I had found the problem and we had found the solution to the problem. And now I'm like 23, 22 weeks pregnant. We're still going strong. I'm still on my daily Lovenox, and I take my shot every night at 7. And I'm so happy because I know this is like the best thing for me and my baby. So we're pumped.
Oh my God. I'm so happy for you. Tell me a little bit more. I want to unpack that just a little bit. What was it like when finding out that it had worked? Because it wasn't the first time, obviously, that you'd found that out, but that, and then as things were going along and the tests were going well, how did that feel? Like, were you able to relax, or is it the thing? No. Okay.
It's so interesting because my first pregnancy, it did not have any like morning sickness or anything like that. This pregnancy, I also have not. I've been so lucky. I've had no like morning sickness, no real symptoms, because I know some women, it affects them like so strongly. But the one thing I had was like the physical anxiety, like sweaty palms, like heart palpitations, like if you're nervous to like go on stage and like speak or something, like that kind of nerves, like that anxiety. I would have that before all of my ultrasounds. Like they would have to take my blood pressure after the ultrasound because it was just like too skyrocketed through the roof. They're like, this is not what we need right now. So we'll do it after.
Yep.
I also, just because of like the losses, I had gotten so many private ultrasounds in my first trimester because I was so nervous. I was like, if I was on a boat, it was like, did the waves of the boat cause something, right? If I stopped too hard at a stop sign, if I laughed too hard.
Oh my God. I remember I went hiking when I was pregnant with my IVF baby, my son, and I went hiking and it was like really hot and I wasn't drinking enough water. And I was literally like, oh my God, did I like kill the baby? And I like called my doctor, like bawling. I was like, I think something's wrong. It's because there's so much anxiety.
So much anxiety. So the only thing that I dealt with was the physical anxiety. And then once I passed the 10-week mark, especially the first trimester mark, then it like really began to subside. And then I started probably feeling him kick. We're pregnant with a boy as well. So when I started feeling him kick around like 20 weeks, then it like has really alleviated because like, I feel like we have a little language going on and I know he's okay. He's just like chilling,
He's
so
like,
that to me, he's like, we're good. So that to me has like really alleviated a lot of the stress. But those first 12 weeks, especially after loss, is so difficult.
Well, I'm so happy for you. And, before we wrap it up, I would love, you've again been really vocal about lessons you've learned going through this and things that you wish you knew then that you know now. Can you share a couple of those with us? Like, what are your biggest kind of takeaways that somebody listening might, need to know if they're like at the beginning of their journey?
So I think the biggest takeaways for me, I'm really grateful that we kind of spread it out when we did. Like we had some time and we gave ourselves some time. It wasn't just like, we need to do this within the first year. And of course, most people, when they, are heading to IVF, it's like they wanted to get pregnant yesterday. And so I'm really happy I listened to my gut of like, when I was 25, being like, maybe this is like not right. Something might be off. Because that allowed us to have that time. I'm sure if I would be starting now, I'd be like, I want to get pregnant, tomorrow. And then it's a lot more stressful. But I think that just goes back to like listening to your gut and to your intuition, because it's never led me wrong. Especially in this journey, it's always just kind of been like, this is your inner voice being like, listen to it and always follow it. And so that to me has been super helpful because I just feel like that's where all my answers were all along. It's like, just listen to your gut and it'll lead you in the right direction. So yeah, I think it's like, it's important to remember that it's a journey and it's not quick. Some people, it can happen, pretty quickly, but that still means months. It is not like in the next day type of situation. So giving you and your partner the grace to kind of just like go through it at whatever timetable it takes, I think is really important.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you to Tess for sharing her story. Guys, check her out on Instagram. It's at Tess Annique is her IG handle. I also want to remind you guys that Fertility Rally memberships are open. So please come and check us out if you're looking for a safe space to land. We welcome everybody, no matter what you're going through. We have 5 to 6 support groups per week, which are included in your membership. They're all virtual, so you can be anywhere in the world. We have pregnancy groups, we have motherhood groups, we have general infertility groups, and we are adding more in the fall as well. So check us out on Instagram at Fertility Rally and on our website at thefertilityrally.com. We are happy to have you. And if you have any questions about that, just reach out to me either on Fertility Rally's IG or at Infertile AF Stories. So last thing, if you have 2 seconds to go rate and review the podcast, that would be amazing. Please spread the word to anybody who might benefit from listening to these stories. The goal is always to normalize the conversation and help people feel less alone. So thank you for listening, and I will talk to you guys next time.